in a moment. Okay, so Margaret, thank you so much for being here. For those of you who do not know anything and haven't read Margaret's bio, I'm just going to let you know that Margaret is one of our ACM distinguished speakers. She's a distinguished scientist, which means that ACM is helping pay to get Margaret here, which makes it such a shame that we're having to do this technology version of Margaret's talk, because she is right around the corner from the university right now. So Dr. Burnett has been doing research that looks at gender inclusivity in software for over 10 years. And a lot of the research before Dr. Burnett started doing this was targeted at looking at software that was directly targeted at women, and that's actually not a very inclusive approach. So because women are using all sorts of software, not just software targeted at them. And so the GenderMag method that she'll be presenting today is aimed at helping software designers identify issues that might cause problems for people who are not the typical male user that software has been targeted at. So I'm going to just turn it over to Margaret now, and I'm going to turn on Margaret's slides, and hopefully you will be able to see Margaret's slides and hear Margaret. So Margaret, thank you so much for being here, and I'm going to start screen sharing now.
Okay, you're very welcome. Thank you for inviting me, Celine. So in case anybody's listening to this that doesn't know, the university is snowed in. Everybody in Charlotte is snowed in. And so here I am in Charlotte, huddled in my hotel room because nobody can go anywhere today in Charlotte. So, okay. Let's see here. Oh, I want to encourage people to ask questions along the way. So we're trying to make this more of a conversation. So please don't feel like you have to wait till the end. And if you're viewing as opposed to in the Hangout itself, you can put questions in the chat window, and Celine will probably notice them, I hope, and we'll interrupt you along the way. Celine, when does the Hangout actually end? Will they start at 4?
We've got an hour and a half, so.
Okay, so we won't be too freaked about ending promptly at any particular time.
No, and people, of course, can just, hang up from the Hangout or stop watching, so no big deal.
Yeah, okay, great. And one last thing, Celine, I'll have my phone on just in case my Wi-Fi goes south or whatever and I don't realize it. You can contact me that way.
Okay.
All right. So, yeah, this is about GenderMag, which is a software process to find gender inclusiveness issues in software. And if you're tweeting, then our hashtag is GenderMag. Next slide, please. Wow, that's really slow. Celine?
Yeah, I did next slide. You should be on the Association for Computing Machinery slide now.
The Distinguished Speakers Program is what I was hoping to see.
Yeah.
Actually, I still just see your PowerPoint thing. Not your, oh, I forgot to select you. Wait, there. No, that was Bruce. I missed. It didn't help. Anyway, so I'm still just seeing your PowerPoint window. Can you just manually scroll forward?
Okay. I'm now on the About ACM slide. Is that what everybody is seeing?
No, we're just seeing the title slide and your regular PowerPoint window, not your presentation.
Oh, that's not good. Okay.
Okay. About ACM. Okay, so go back one to the distinguished speaker.
Okay.
Okay, so ACM is helping to pay for this trip, and they always ask that we display this slide, so now you know. Next slide. And in case there's anyone here who isn't familiar with ACM, I've boldified a couple of things on this slide that they've sent me. It's the world's largest educational and scientific computing society, and it offers strong leadership, promotion to high standards, and recognition of technical excellence. And all of this sounds pretty markety, but it's all just really, really forward, please. So here we are. Here's the executive summary. Do software tools support a variety of smart users? So this guy at the top, he's a smart user. But it turns out that software tools don't support the variety of smart users we might like, and we know this from years of investigation, thanks in part to support from NSF and Microsoft. it's a matter of unconscious bias, not something that people are doing deliberately. But it's tended to support one kind of user well, namely people like that guy up there at the top, and not a whole lot of other smart users. So what's new in this talk? I mean, some of you have heard gender inclusiveness issues before, but what's brand new is that we have a method, a practical method that we've derived from this research to enable ordinary software practitioners of one sort or another to find gender inclusiveness issues in there. And you can do it even without a lab study. So, next slide. So this slide, if you could see it, which you can't because you can't really tell the animations this way, is making the case that there are a lot of reasons. Oh, thank you. There are a lot of reasons to care about gender differences for using software. The first reason is that really ignorance is not bliss. And we would think that we'd know this, but in fact, we as computer science academics had to learn it the hard way. So as I think almost everybody knows, way back in, say, the 70s and 80s, there used to be a reasonable number of women in the computing professions, and they all went away in the 80s, almost all of them. And for at least a decade now, people have been trying very, very hard to rectify that situation, but once it had time to take hold, it's been very difficult to undo. And so the reason is, unwittingly, we were teaching to males. And so, you know, we had to learn how to change things, how to teach in a different way. We had fallen into some habits, and they weren't inclusive habits. So that's reason one. Ignorance isn't bliss. Reason two is it's become well known, especially among design researchers, that studying one population segment that may be underserved is a great way to actually help everyone. And a classic example of that is curb cuts. So way back when, there were no curb cuts, and if you look at the bottom left of your screen, you'll see a guy in a wheelchair dealing with a sidewalk with no curb cuts. And so somebody noticed situations like this, and curb cuts were invented and born. And so they did help people in wheelchairs. You'll see in kind of the middle right, there's a guy in a wheelchair taking good advantage of curb cuts, and they help people with walkers. Up there in the top left is a picture, and they help people in bicycles. On the top right, you see that. They help mothers pushing babies in strollers. That's down kind of in the middle bottom, and they help people with pushing heavy bales of hay, and they help people pulling their roller bags. So, wow, Celine, good animation. So anyway, that's reason number two. Next slide. And here's number three, the business case. So this actually was something that triggered the birth of GenderMag. So what happened is, about 2.5 years ago, I got email from a guy whose name isn't John, who works at a company that's not named Company X. And that company makes software for a particular, and these people program these medical devices for their patients' needs. And so it's like a prescription. They take a device and they do particular settings specifically for that patient. And so this is an end-user programming thing. Anyway, it turns out that in that medical specialty, most of the practitioners are females. In fact, 85% of it. Discovered that females basically hated their software, but he didn't know why. And so, and furthermore, he didn't speak of change. And so, you know, imagine you bring a female into the lab and they just have a lot of trouble with the software, or they just hate it, but you don't really know why. You don't know what to do exactly. So that's the situation he was in. And so he did some Google searches, and he found a bunch of the foundational work that my team had been developing, and so he figured I must know the answer, and so he contacted me and said, what do I do? Next slide. And the thing is, we realized that we didn't really have anything to give him. I mean, what are we supposed to do? Send John a whole bunch of research papers that showed foundations? I mean, he needed something practical. And so that's when GenderMag was born, to be a bridge from the research that other people and we had been doing to something practical that people like John could use. So it's a method to identify particular gender software, gender inclusiveness issues in software. We've also packaged it up into a kit. This is, of course, all free. So people, if they want to, can download it and play around with it and use it on their own software. And the link to that will be at the end. Next slide. So it has, okay, GenderMag stands for Gender Inclusiveness Magnifier. And so it evaluates tools inclusiveness. So far, we're being fairly conservative in what we say is the scope of it. And so we say that it's about problem-solving software. So what's that? Well, that's software that in which somebody comes to the computer because they have something they're trying to work out. Maybe they're trying to work out their budget, and so they're using Excel, or maybe they're trying to debug something, so they're using a debugging tool, or maybe they're trying to understand large amounts of data, and so they're doing visualization. But the common characteristics is they're scratching their head and they're saying, what, why, how come, stuff like that. So that's our scope. So for that kind of software, GenderMag will help you find gender inclusiveness issues. It consists of some personas that have some gender inclusiveness facets and a gender specialized cognitive walkthrough that marries the personas and the facets. Next slide. Okay, so what's a persona? Just in case there are people listening that haven't heard of those before, they represent sort of an archetype of some slice of a system's intended users. Includes their goals and their motivations and their attitudes. These are fairly widely used for one thing and another throughout design, especially in the design and user experience practical world. And our personas are kind of different from the standard ones, and they're all based on 5 theory-based facets. And here they are, but don't worry about memorizing this list. We'll go through these. And the 4 personas are Tim, Abby, Pat, and Pat. Next slide. So don't try to read this. It is not intended for reading. So this is Abby, though, and so the only thing I want you to notice so far is it all fits on one screen. And so I'm going to let Abby introduce us to the facets, and along the way we'll see where they came from and what the implications are. So there, I think, is an animation here. Something's supposed to blow up. Yeah, facet number 1, attitude toward technology. So this is Abby's attitude toward technology. The other personas have different ones, but Abby has low computer self-efficacy, meaning that she has low self-confidence in performing computing tasks. And if something goes wrong, she tends to blame herself. Next slide. So let's take a look at some data about computer self-efficacy and what that even means, and see what Abby's job is supposed to be. So one thing, so the yellow is, well, okay, so the facets. Each facet, I've mentioned there are 5 of them, each facet is backed by at least 5 independent empirical studies, and also most of them are very well backed by theories. So these are not just things I figured out in some little study I did by myself. These are just really well established out there. The really pervasive findings is that tend to have lower computer self-efficacy than males do. And computer self-efficacy is a specific form of self-confidence. It's your confidence in your ability to carry out an upcoming task, and you have a pretty good idea of what that task is about. So somebody might have high cooking self-efficacy and low bike riding self-efficacy, and like that. It's very situational. Anyway, so that's what the literature is about. Now, the first thing to notice, the yellow is the females and the blue is the males from just one study, because it's too hard to present 5 studies. So this is just one study, but it gives you an idea. And so the first thing to notice is the distributions are very different. The females, about 1/3 of them are high self-efficacy, about 1/3 of them are middle, and about 1/3 of them are low. The males in this study, 75% of them were high computer self-efficacy. So Abby's job is the persona you've briefly met. Her job in the self-efficacy department, well-being of the interests of that 1/3 of the females that have low computer self-efficacy, and also for the 6% of the males who do. And Tim's job, he's another of the personas you haven't met yet, he's over there on the left. His job is to watch out for the interests of the 75% of males that are high self-efficacy and the third of females that are high self-efficacy. And then the PACs take care of the middle values. So that's kind of how these personas work and how they map to the underlying data. And by the way, we also have the foundation documents behind all of these personas available, that one of the links that I'll be giving you at the end. Next slide. Okay, so let's see here. Self-efficacy in general is a very well-established theory and has been shown to be really predictive of how things turn out because it's predictive of somebody's willingness to try and to persevere. So, for example, if you have low cooking self-efficacy and you start right off by burning the water, then you're not even going to try again. You say, "See, I knew I was no good at this," expected, and you just give up. So the higher your self-efficacy, the more likely you are to persevere even when things aren't going well. Next slide. So here's some data from one study that we did. In this study, we separated some software features in our spreadsheet prototype into 3 piles. The kind we called familiar features, the kind we called taught features, and the kind we called untaught features. So you see some little doohickeys on the screen, don't worry too much about them, but basically all of our users were experienced spreadsheet users, and so they all know how to do formula edits. So that was our familiar feature. And then we had something that we knew they'd never seen before because they were unique in our prototype, and that was the check mark and an arrow. And so in that study, at the very beginning of it, we had a little tutorial where we taught everybody to use those. And then there were the untaught feature, which you do with a little X mark, and we did not teach those. Instead, we just said, "Oh, and there are these X marks," and then everything was supported with a tooltip. So we'll just go on to the next slide. So if we look at the at self-efficacy as a predictor of effectively using the fancy new features, then this dot plot kind of shows us the story. So everything I show you is statistically significant unless I tell you it's not. And in this one, the yellow dots are the females and the black dots are the males. And so self-efficacy is on the x-axis, and effective use of the fancy new features that weren't familiar, that's the y-axis. So the first thing you can notice is if you were to draw a vertical line, right in the middle of this graph, you'd notice that most of the yellow dots are to the left of it, and most of the black dots are to the right of it. So what that says is, just like all the other literature, the females, a lot of them had lower computer self-efficacy, and a lot of the males had higher computer self-efficacy. No surprise there. The second thing to notice is that lovely 45-degree line that's pink. So that what that's demonstrating is that, in fact, there was a significant relationship between the females' effectiveness with the fancy new features and their computer self-efficacy. So what that says is you have females with high self-efficacy and females with low self-efficacy, and that was very predictive of their effectiveness with the fancy new features. Okay, so that's still something we might have expected, but it's especially important here because so many of the females were low on the self-efficacy scale, and now we know this had a marked effect on how effective they were with the fancy new features, and so we don't like that. Then you see that blue line. Actually, that one's not significant, but the software was willing to draw it anyway, so there you go. But the black, it represents the sort of non-trend of the males, the black dots, and what that says is there was no relationship between their self-efficacy and their effectiveness with the features. So what that says is you've got high self-efficacy males and you've got low self-efficacy males, and you have males that are good at the features and males that aren't so good at the features, and there's no relationship. So one of the things that tells us is this is not just about self-efficacy. There's more going on with the fancy new features. Next slide. Okay, so we measured people's use of the features about a bazillion different ways, and no matter what we measured, the females were much more interested in hanging out with the familiar features, and by that I mean formula editing as their way of debugging the spreadsheet formulas. That's what they were supposed to be doing. And the males were much more willing and eager to hang out with the fancy new features. So we'll just kind of skip back past all these numbers and get to the next slide. Now, this is very interesting. What we had told them to do was to find and fix the errors in the spreadsheets, fix the bugs. And so we had seeded the spreadsheet with 6 bugs that we had harvested from earlier end users of spreadsheets. And what you can see is there was no difference between the number of bugs that the males and the females fixed. Exactly. If you look at the rightmost column, these are the new bugs that they introduced and that stayed introduced. In other words, never went away. And as you can see, the females introduced a great deal, significantly more bugs in the spreadsheet formulas that never went away. So ultimately, their spreadsheets ended up more buggy because of that. So what's going on here? Next slide. Okay, so in order to understand that, we need the next facet, facet number 2, risk aversion. So Abby is risk averse with new software features. She worries that she's going to spend time on them and still not get any benefits. So she definitely prefers to perform tasks in the safe, familiar way. Next slide. So there's a lot of literature about risk aversion and gender. And in almost every, in every paper I've ever seen, females either turn out to be more risk averse than males, or there's no difference. I've never seen a paper in which males were more risk averse than females. So you combine this with the females' statistically lower computer self-efficacy, and it makes a lot of sense that they would use the fancy new features less. Sorry, I didn't mean to throw you into a fit, Bruce.
I'll try to stop.
Do you want some of my water?
Yes, please, bring it over.
At the end of that study, we had a questionnaire. And we said, if you didn't use this feature or that feature, why not? And the females were significantly more likely to say, because I thought it would take me too long to learn them. But we knew that it didn't take them too long to learn them because we also had a comprehension test at the end on the features, and it was a really difficult comprehension test. They had to answer 11 different questions, and they were hard. And there was no difference in the learning, which is flat out amazing, really, because the males had so much more practice with the features because they actually used them. So here we have the females thinking it's going to take them too long to learn, but it didn't take them too long to learn. Using those features is helpful. We have a lot of other studies that show that using the fancy new features really does help with debugging. And in fact, the only dangerous feature in that whole collection was the familiar one, formula editing, because that's the only way it's possible to add a new bug. And the females were using statistically more of that very dangerous feature because to them it was the safe one. And so by the law of probability, of course, they're going to introduce more bugs. So basically, you know, all of these things conspired to them doing a, I don't want to call it a worse job because, you know, they did very well on much of it and even stayed out of trouble better than you would expect. But still, all in all, they were in a riskier situation, and that showed in the outcomes of these. So on to the next slide. All right, so I've talked about 2 of the facets. I really want to stop here for a moment and see if there are any questions so far. No? Shall I just blunder on?
So,
Okay.
Margaret, it seems to me that people are not actually able to get onto the broadcast site, so we may not be having as much of an audience as we think we are. Mary Lou, are you seeing any questions? No? Okay. So, so far everything is clear, so keep going.
Okay. All right, so facet number 3 is willingness to explore and tinker. This is really kind of a learning style thing about learning new features. So Abby does not really like learning new features by tinkering. That's not her way. She would much rather take a tutorial or have step-by-step guidance, for example, in the form of wizards. And she also, of course, avoids troublesome features if the way she has to learn them is by tinkering. Okay, next slide. By the way, this flask is not a real flask. It's a it's a water bottle. See, it says empty wit. See? So you know it must be good for you.
Very nice.
Okay. Playful experimentation. So we did another study in which we looked into this very thing, and females did tinker less. But when they did, they were very good at it when they did tinker. The way they tinkered when they did was what we call pausefully. So there's all this education literature that says that when you're in a, shall we say, a rapid feedback situation, like, for example, in the classroom, that a slight pause right after you've gotten feedback to reflect on it is significantly predictive of your learning something from it. And so they've done a lot of different studies, and this one of the common thresholds that they use is 3 seconds. So we borrowed that threshold and we measured pausefulness that same way. And what we found, and so here's what pauseful tinkering looks like. Tink, tink, okay? The other kind looks like this. Tinker, 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 okay? So our results showed that pauseful tinkering was indeed predictive of the users, of the participants' understanding and their effective use of these features. And almost uniformly, when the females tinkered, they did it in this very pauseful, very productive way. Some of the males were pauseful like that too, and when they were, then it was just as beneficial to them. But males did tinker more, and a lot of them were not pauseful. They just went nuts. They just couldn't stop tinkering. And when they were like that, it hurt their performance. Okay, the more they tinkered, the worse they got. Next slide. And that's Tim. Tim's persona is a crazy tinkerer, and the Pats are both pauseful tinkering. So just to show you that this foundational work isn't all about spreadsheets, here's some data that I got from, you don't have to pull these apart, Celine, they all say the same thing, that I got from some other studies that were done in entirely different settings. And basically, all of these things said exactly the same thing. So here's one where the female said, it was a survey question, I only learned the technology I have to know. And the females came in neutral on that, and the males disagreed. Here's another one. I like to explore technology that's not critical to my job. The females are okay with it. The males love it. So all of these differences are significant. You break them out by job title, you still get the same thing. Question after question after question always said the same thing. Okay, next slide. So that kind of brings us into motivations and strategies. This is facet number 4. And so Abby has little desire to learn new functions and features. She likes to use methods she's already familiar with and comfortable with to achieve her technology goals. So next slide. So here's one way this looked. This was one of the females in one of our studies. And so this is not her picture, but it is a picture representing her. And so she started out saying, we had introduced her to yet another new feature, something called guards, which actually are assertions. And so she's using them, and she says, so 0 to 100 is the guard I'm entering. Okay, So it doesn't like the -5. They can get a 0. And so she's being very productive, getting lots of benefits from this feature. Next slide. Here's what one of the males said in that same study. The first thing I'm going to do is go through and check the guards for everything. So he starts out business-like, just like she did, just to make sure none of the entered values are above or below any of the ranges specified. So homework 1, actually, I'm going to put guards on everything because I feel like it. I don't even know if this is necessary, but it's fun. So he's having all this fun, and he starts putting guards on everything, and then he gets to this place. Okay, so it doesn't like my guard, apparently. Okay, aha. And so he ends up in this good place, just like she did. So they both started the same way. They both ended the same way. but his motivations and therefore his path to the end were very different. And so that just shows a difference in why people make the choices they make and how they might get there. Next slide. Oh, this is a hidden slide. Next slide. Okay, Unlocking the Clubhouse. This is an old book, but a lot of people are really familiar with it, so I like to show this one too. Another computing task is majoring in computer science, and so this is out of Unlocking the Clubhouse. She had taken an inventory of all the reasons why people majored in computer science, and the big thing to notice here is the profiles are different for males and females. So the males almost all went into it for the joy of computing. And you'll notice that the females are pretty into the joy of computing too. But they had all these other motivations as well that were much more prominent than they were for males. It again just shows that you know, males and females statistically often have very different motivations, and so when we, for example, teach or when we design software, we shouldn't be designing just with a narrow view of what somebody might be interested in. Okay, next. Facet number 5. This is actually one of my favorite ones. Information processing style. So when you're trying to solve a problem, usually you feel the need to gather information. And statistically, males and females' information processing styles tend to be different in those situations. So Abby is what's called a comprehensive information processor. So when she needs information, she likes to gather a bunch of it to try to form a sort of a larger understanding of the problem before she starts taking actions to try to solve it. And she's very different from Tim in this respect. Next one. So I think I'm just going to skip this one because, oh well, because this one is so much fun. So this one is just 2 really complicated graphs, but I'm going to talk you through them. Imagine animations. So the first thing I want you to look at is the left axes. So the top graph is the most successful male in a study we did, a sense-making study, and the bottom graph is the most successful female we had in those studies, and their success rates were very similar. And so the bottom 3 things on that y-axis are information gathering phases in the sense-making loop. That's right. And the top 3 are sort of action phases. So if we're interested in information processing, we'll look at the bottom 3 things. Now for the male, what I want you to notice is those black arrows. Those are his maximum amount of time spent information gathering before he started taking some action. As you can see, his maximum was about 5 minutes of information gathering before he did stuff. A lot of times it was much, much shorter than that. You know, a lot of times he acted almost immediately upon gathering new information. Now look at the black arrows for the females. Look at the shortest one. That's the one over on the left. That one's about 7 minutes. Her minimum information gathering period is longer than his maximum. Okay? Very different information processing styles. So she likes to gather a lot before she takes action. Now let's look at the mistakes they made. Those are the red rectangles. So the red rectangles are, those are bugs that people tried to fix and they fixed wrong. And so this male, he made 7 mistakes. So he basically is typing wrong formulas in. And so what you can see is if you look at those, he makes a mistake, he gathers just a tiny little bit more information, takes a new action, oh, there's another mistake, does a little bit more action, gathers a little more another action, and look, he fixed it. And so his information processing style is characterized a lot by reading a little tiny bit, taking an action, possibly backtracking, and correcting it. And that's just his style. So yeah, he makes a lot of mistakes, but he fixes them. Now, look at all the mistakes she made. Exactly 0. Okay? She just doesn't go about it the same way. She gathers a lot more up front, and when she does it right. If you count up all the bugs they fixed, those are the filled-in stars, you'll see that he fixed 1 more correctly than she did. And if you count in all the filled-in crosses, those are the found, you'll see that she found 1 more than he did. So basically, they performed equally well, but they went about it in very different ways. Next slide. So now you know this and I know this, but we're researchers. And so GenderMag's job is to let John know this. Should I pause for questions again? No. Okay.
Any questions from anybody?
I just want to add that the people who are watching it live have a 30-second gap, so they don't hear you ask for questions until 30 seconds after. When you asked for questions last time, a few people did chime in, not with questions, but just saying, Jamie Souvenir said, I'm here and listening and enjoying the talk. Erin Cherry said, I'm also listening. Berto chimed in that something about the numbers that are logged into Gmail. So we need to give them a couple more minutes. I don't see anything coming up, but I guess if people do want to ask questions at any time, if they put them in there, I'm watching the comments.
Great. Thanks, Mary Lou. All right.
Okay.
Keep going, Margaret. It's awesome.
Okay, so GenderMag is to bring this stuff to John, and part of the way we're doing that is with these personas. All right, next slide. So we have these 4 personas. You've met Abby now. We also have the 2 Pats, and we have Tim. And each one of them has these same 5 facets, but with different facet values. In other words, everybody talks about self-efficacy, but Abby has low self-efficacy, Tim has high self-efficacy, and the Pats have medium self-efficacy. All of this is set into a process, which is a gender-specialized cognitive walkthrough that refers explicitly to the 5 facets. Next slide. So here's the rest of Abby, which is actually almost identical to the Tim and the Pats. So here's her background knowledge. She's an accountant. All 4 of them are accountants. The software systems are new to her and to them. She describes herself as a numbers person. She's good at math. She likes logic. She likes working with puzzles. So this is true of all 4 of them. There's no difference in their background, their education, their logical and mathematical skills. They just have different ways of thinking and problem solving and different motivations for why they do what they do. Okay, onward. So the cognitive walkthrough. In case there's anybody on that's not familiar with a standard cognitive walkthrough, it's an inspection method. People who are working on a user interface or something like that use it to evaluate usability and learnability, thinking of themselves as though they were a first-time user. And so because it doesn't require bringing in an actual user yet, you can find problems early, and then when you do get around to bringing in users, you know, you've got some of those problems out of the way. So there's a preparatory stage in which you figure out what, you know, who the targeted user is supposed to be and what task they're supposed to be doing, and some kind of ideal sequence of subgoals and actions. And then there's an analysis phase. So you walk through a prototype step by step, and has the subgoal that we wish they had, and we'll know what to do and know if they've made progress. So that's a standard cognitive walkthrough. And so the GenderMag cognitive walkthrough, I call it a gender specialized one, but it's not that special. It just makes really concrete and explicit the facets and the personas so that people don't forget what they're doing and turn it into some sort of generic user that tends to not have the facets that we need people to consider. Next slide. So the red parts are the changes we made. So for each subgoal, instead of in standard cognitive walkthrough, it says will the user, and we always substitute in the persona that the evaluation team has chosen to use. You've met Abby, and so if they've chosen to use Abby for their cognitive walkthrough, then it says will Abby perform this subgoal. If they're using Tim, then it says Tim. And then another change is, besides yes or no, we added a maybe. And this turned out to be really important, because what we found is that without that maybe, sometimes people would talk each other in and out of opinions. And so what we wanted to make sure of is that everybody in the room has a say and doesn't feel sort of outvoted. And this turns out to be really important, because some people are sort of better at standing up for whichever persona they're using at the moment than others are. And then the other change is we refer people to the particular facets that are especially relevant to each question, so that they don't just kind of forget about Abby or forget about one of her facets or whoever they're doing, Abby or Tim or whatever. So that's all we changed. And this is a complete set of questions for the cognitive walkthrough. Okay, next one. Okay, so what have we done empirically to see how it works? We started with a formative case study at Company X. That was the one with the medical practitioners. And it was helpful, but we learned a lot. And then we did a formative workshop event at VLHCC in which we had the entire audience actually serve as evaluators. And that went reasonably a lot more. And then we did a lab study with professional UXers in London and learned a lot more, and that one came out quite well. And since that time, we've been working with several companies. Some of the ones that are most recent are AnswerDash, Microsoft, and Configit. And our results are that GenderMag is actually usable by professional UXers and software developers with no gender background. I'm so excited. And, next slide. Look at this. This is my favorite slide. Yay, yay. This is a sneak peek. This is our Chi 16 paper, so you get to hear 20 whole minutes on just this if you come to Chi. So this is 4 real-world teams, and none of them are the teams that are the companies I mentioned on the previous page. These are different companies. The first 2 are a government agency, but it was 2 independent teams actually located in different cities, Team GB and GS. And then there's Company E and Company W. So those are big hardware software companies. Now, just above the bars, you'll see some numbers. And so for 10, what that says is when they did their GenderMag walkthrough on their own software, 18% of the actions they evaluated, these are things in the user interface, the features, had some sort of usability issue. Okay, so they're 18%, Company GS, it was 78%, and like that. All right, then the big blue number, that is the percent of actions they evaluated that were gender inclusiveness issues, that had gender inclusiveness issues. So you can see that Team GB, 14% of the actions or UI features that they evaluated had gender inclusiveness issues, and then the other 4% were just sort of generic usability issues. So a generic usability issue could be, oh, the font's too small, you know, it's too hidden, stuff like that. A gender inclusiveness issue relates to one of the 5 facets. And so they said, you know, that looks way too risky. Abby is not going to click on it. And so we say that that's a gender inclusiveness issue because if they used the facet value of the persona that they were evaluating, that says it's going to disproportionately affect the, say, for example, Abby's of the world. So anyway, so it's interesting to look at the first 2 especially because Team GB and GS were evaluating the same software. It's their own software, but they were doing different paths through it, different use cases. And so this software that they were evaluating has been in use for 10 years, and they're still using it. And almost all of their users are females. And those females are being subjected to between 14% and 15% or 56% actual gender inclusiveness issues every day in this software they're using. So that's just scary. That's your sort of standard, shall we say, desktop-oriented software. And then the one that Company E evaluated, that is a brand new prototype. It's not even out yet. And it's kind of interesting. I mean, on the one hand, yeah, it's a brand new prototype, not even out yet, so 93% of what they evaluated had some kind of usability issue. Okay, you know, fair enough. But they were surprised, actually, that we found anything, let alone gender inclusiveness issues, because they said, oh, it's really so simple, you won't find anything. And then the last one, this was sort of a middle ground. So the last one is intended for mobile phones. And that software has been out there for a couple of years, but it's just about to undergo redevelopment because they've had some new sort of inspirations for it. And so 29% of those actions had gender inclusiveness issues. So the overall average is 25% of all of these software bits had 25% of the features in them had gender inclusiveness issues. That's 1 out of 4. which just scared me to death. 1 out of 4. Can you believe it? And these are these teams, the creators, evaluating their own software. This isn't evaluating somebody else's. So, okay, and actually, that's the first 4 teams we did field studies on. Since that time, we've worked with, well, a grand total of 17 teams, and the average is going up. We're sitting at 1 out of 3 right now. So, yeah, next slide. So, in conclusion, from prior research on gender, we extracted the 5 facets of gender inclusiveness that were the most thoroughly established, most related to problem solving, and most grokkable by people without a research background in gender, and encapsulated these into the GenderMag method, with the goal of helping people create more inclusive software by taking down inclusiveness barriers one at a time. So we're not advocating like a pink version and a blue version, which would be absolutely ridiculous. Instead, we're saying if there's a barrier, find that barrier using GenderMag, and then you'll have a fairly good idea of how to take it down because you know why you found it. So next slide gives all the resources. So yeah, tweet stuff, Facebook thing, website in which you can download papers, personas, foundations, the kit, and there's how to contact me. So maybe people want to take a picture or a screenshot or something of this, and then maybe we'll go back to the conclusion slide while we handle any questions that may be in people's minds.
All right. Thank you so much, Margaret. That was excellent. At this point, we can see if there's questions that are going to come up on the event page. Mary Lou, are you able to see that? And then we can also take questions from the people who are here in the Hangout, Bruce and Manuel and Mary Lou. I'll start off with a question. So, are you planning to create any kind of catalog of sort of the common usability issues that GenderMag has helped people to discover?
You know, it's a great question, and we've been asked it before, and it's an awesome idea. So I think we're getting there. We don't feel like we've gotten far enough along yet to even be able to begin to do it, but I have noticed that the 2 facets that seem to turn up the most stuff are tinkering and risk. Okay. So it seems like, well, one of the things is a lot of software is written with the underlying assumption that the way people will learn all the features is by tinkering. And so that's not gender inclusive because that's not the preferred learning style of a lot of people, especially if they happen to be female. And so just by noticing that and providing a way to learn that software without having to tinker with it, just for example, even a tooltip, or you know, other ways depending on whether your platform supports tooltips, is a great step forward. So I guess that's one.
Okay.
I'd like to ask a question that Berto has typed in. He said in the sneak peek, 33% doesn't paint the entire picture. Do you have a sense of how many gender-inclusive usability issues were actually found? Not the percentage, but a number?
Yes. Our Chi-16 paper has that. Let's see here if I have that handy. I have it hanging off my papers page already, so people can go there later. I wasn't recommending that you do it right this second. Let me just see if I can quickly get my hands on it, though.
I guess order of magnitude would be good rather than trying to look it up. Is it 5 or 100 or?
Yeah, it tends to be closer to 5 than 100 in any one session. The sessions that I've observed have tended to be less than 2 hours, and a lot of times they need about the first 20 minutes to get oriented and get their software up and ready to drive and get a little bit of training on how you do cognitive walkthroughs, because most of the people that I've done these with haven't done cognitive walkthroughs before. So we waste about half an hour, I guess, just getting organized. And then there tends to be a lot of discussion. And so especially when we're being good about canvassing all the opinions in the room. And so somebody might spend a long time talking about each feature. They say, well, one person says, yeah, that's obvious. And somebody else says, well, wait, how would she know that does that if she doesn't tinker with it? And somebody else says, well, she's going to do it anyway because she is very motivated about doing her job well. And so, they'll have these conversations that really help them to understand, whichever persona. Usually people start with Abby. And so it does tend to go on, but then eventually you get faster at it. But the ones I've observed have been slow going because, everybody is really just getting into it.
And then Jamie Souvenir asked a question. She said, great tool. In your most recent study for the CHI 2016 paper, do you have some idea of the most common issues that were detected by GenderMag? Which I guess is similar to Celine's question, but I guess was it reported in the paper? What were the common issues across those studies being reported?
Okay, it's a good question. I don't have the kind of answer you might be hoping for. Tinkering is as close as I can get, with risk as a close second, because everybody is evaluating their own software, and so things look different. And so one person might say, they don't like to push on the opt-in button, and so nobody else maybe has an opt-in button. They explain why, because it looks risky, or, it looks like, they may have to give away more personal information than they'd be comfortable doing or something like that. But then somebody else's software may not even have such a feature, and so there isn't a way to connect the dots in that way. I wanted it to be a field study with no controls by us at all. So we didn't have any opinions whatsoever on what they ought to evaluate. It was just whatever they felt a need to evaluate. And so that's why we don't have any really common ground other than just at the facet level.
And then Heather Lipford asked a question. She said, what has been the reaction of the groups who've used it? Have you noticed any gendered reactions?
Yes.
Or differences in people who are particularly good at keeping these factors in mind during the walkthrough?
Yes. Wonderful question. Yes to everything. So I've noticed that software developers can use it and are good at it. But I've also noted that some people have kind of a knack for it. And the people who have a knack for it tend to either be UXers, professional UXers, or people who have been around customers in some way over time. And so these will often be like product managers or just more senior developers who've actually been exposed to some of the problems that customers encounter. Those people get it more. But everybody finds something. Yes, there are a lot of different reactions. Also keep in mind that well, I haven't told you this before, so how could you keep it in mind? But anyway, GenderMag's in beta, and so we continue to learn from it. And the more people use it and give us feedback about what worked and what didn't and what was really wonderful and what was really terrible, the better we can get at it too. And so at first there was a lot of worrying about whether GenderMag might actually promote stereotypes in an inappropriate way, GenderMag in several ways, to try to make that not be an issue. And it hasn't been something people talk about anymore, so perhaps we've succeeded. One of the relatively recent changes was the addition of the two Pats. And so I think that really helped to clarify that Abby wasn't intended to represent all females and Tim wasn't intended to represent all males. And another thing that we changed that I think really helped is when we got the foundations ready to make public, then those helped to allay people's fears too, because once they could see the data behind everything and which segments of the population the different personas were looking out for, that seemed to make them a lot more comfortable. But that used to come up a lot, and it still occasionally comes up. Another thing that is particularly interesting is that women go through quite a range of emotions when they're using GenderMag. Men, not so much. So maybe it's because usually when people use GenderMag, they choose Abby as their persona. And they choose her because she is the farthest away from the people they've been automatically assuming for decades and decades, and so they feel the need to be stretched. And so some females say, at last, I'm validated. I'm Abby. Yes, it's me. And I've had lots and lots of women say that, including any number of computer science professionals, computer science professors even, have often said that. So this is not specific to a job title or a lack of background. It's a problem-solving and sort of attitude set of attributes, something that's relatively static, not something that is based on education. Anyway, so some females and some females, you know, they are so excited about it because another nice thing about it is they feel like they have a better voice than they had before. I mean, when this happens, because it's safer now to look out for Abby than, you know, so imagine yourself the only female in a group of male software developers, and the male developers all think the feature looks fine, and you're thinking, oh, you know, I don't really like it, but
Margaret, you
must
seem
be
to be
wrong.
cutting
It's
out.
just me. Everybody else likes it.
Is that the case? Are other people hearing Margaret speak okay?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, so it must be just my internet connection. Keep
Okay.
going, Margaret.
Well, while we're interrupted, I'd like to ask a question myself, and that's about the slide where you had a bullet point about removing barriers. And
Removing barriers. Yeah.
And that you would remove them one at a time. I'm just wondering how easy it is to make a connection between the issue and how to remove that as a barrier. I mean, how to resolve the issue, whether it looks like GenderMag can identify issues, but does it come along with heuristics or rules on how to remove that as a barrier? Like, for example, tinkering. How do you, is it an easy fix to remove that?